Topic 2. What is the ego? The root of all suffering. Hello and welcome. According to Sri Ramana Maharshi, behind every problem we face in life, whether it is fear, anxiety, desire, anger, jealousy, or the constant feeling of incompleteness, there lies one single root cause. That root cause is the ego. Almost every spiritual tradition speaks about the ego, but Sri Ramana Maharshi gave one of the clearest, most direct, and most practical explanations of what the ego actually is and how it can be dissolved. In this episode, we will explore his complete teaching on the nature of the ego, what it is, where it comes from, why it causes suffering, and how it can be destroyed.
What exactly is the ego?
The ego is the thought I. It is the first thought that arises. All other thoughts arise only after this I thought. It is also called Aham-Vritti, the I thought.
Ramana Maharshi repeatedly emphasized that the ego is not the body. It is not a physical thing. It is simply a thought, the thought I. This thought appears and immediately identifies with the body. It says, I am this body. From this single identification, the sense of being a separate individual is born. Once this happens, the ideas of I am the doer, I am the experiencer, this is mine, and that is not mine, all arise. Along with them comes the entire world of problems, desires, fears, and suffering.
Why is the ego considered the cause of all suffering?
As long as the ego exists, there will be suffering. The ego creates the sense of me and mine. From this arises desire, fear, attachment, and bondage. When the ego is absent, suffering also disappears.
Ramana explained that the ego is not just one of the problems. It is the source of all problems. Because of the ego, we constantly feel incomplete. We desire things to complete ourselves. When we get them, we fear losing them. When we don't get them, we suffer. The ego is always comparing, always wanting more, always protecting its identity. This constant inner struggle is what we experience as suffering. When the ego is absent, this struggle ends. Peace remains.
Where does the ego come from?
The ego rises from the self. It is like a wave rising from the ocean. Just as the wave is not separate from the ocean, the ego is not separate from the self. But because of ignorance, we take the ego to be real and separate.
This is a very important point. Ramana did not say the ego is some evil force that came from outside. He said the ego rises from the self itself. It is a mistaken identification. The self, which is pure and infinite, appears to be limited because of this I am the body idea. Just as a wave rises from the ocean and merges back into it, the ego rises from the self, and when investigated, merges back into the self.
Does the ego exist all the time?
No. The ego appears in the waking state and becomes active in the dream state. In deep sleep, the ego completely disappears. This shows that the ego is not permanent. It rises and sets like the sun. Only the self remains unchanged in all three states.
This is one of the strongest proofs Ramana gave. In deep sleep, there is no ego, no I am the body, no worries, no desires. Yet we exist. When we wake up, we say, I slept peacefully. This clearly proves that our real nature is not the ego. The ego comes and goes, but the self remains.
Does the ego really exist?
The ego has no real existence of its own. It is like a ghost. When you search for it through self-inquiry, it disappears. It appears real only because we never examine it properly.
Ramana often said, the ego is like a ghost that appears in the dark. As long as we don't bring the light of inquiry, it seems real and frightening. The moment we turn our attention toward it and ask, who am I? It loses its power and vanishes. The ego is not an entity. It is only a thought. And no thought has independent existence.
How can the ego be destroyed?
The ego is destroyed by self-inquiry. Ask, who am I, and trace the I thought back to its source. When the source is found, the ego disappears and only the self remains.
Ramana was very clear. The ego cannot be destroyed by fighting it or by trying to suppress it. The only way is to investigate it. When we sincerely ask, who am I, and turn our attention toward the source of the I, the ego begins to lose its grip. Eventually, it dissolves completely. What remains is the self, which was always there. The famous story of the king and the minister. Ramana Maharshi sometimes told stories to explain how wrong ideas can prevent us from seeing the truth. Here is one such story. There was once a king who had a minister. This minister misused his power and position. The other ministers became jealous and plotted against him. They spread false news that the minister was seriously ill. Later, they told the king that the minister had died. They even prevented the king from meeting him. The king, believing the false reports, was very sad. The minister was actually alive. He tried many times to meet the king and clear his name. But every time, the other ministers created situations that made the king believe he was seeing the minister's ghost. Finally, the disappointed minister left the palace and went deep into the forest to do intense spiritual practice. After many years, the king happened to pass through that forest while hunting. He saw the former minister sitting in deep meditation under a tree. But the king immediately ran away in fear, thinking he had seen a ghost. The moral of this story is profound. Even though the minister was standing right in front of the king in flesh and blood, the king could not recognize him because of his wrong belief that the minister was dead. In the same way, the self is always present. But because of our wrong identification with the ego, we fail to recognize our own true nature.
How should one practice to destroy the ego in daily life?
Whenever the ego rises, ask, who am I? Do not fight the ego. Simply investigate it. The more you inquire, the weaker it becomes.
Here is a clear and practical method to work with the ego throughout the day. Step-by-step daily practice. Notice the I. Throughout the day, whenever you feel any strong emotion, whether it is anger, fear, pride, hurt, or desire, pause for a moment and notice the I in that feeling. For example, I am angry, I am worried, I am proud. Ask the direct question. Immediately ask yourself, who is this I that is feeling this? Or, to whom has this thought come? Turn inward and feel the source. Instead of answering with words, gently turn your attention inward and feel where this sense of I is arising from. Do not think about it. Simply stay with the feeling of I. Stay with the stillness. When the mind becomes quiet, remain in that quietness for a few moments. Do not rush to pick up new thoughts. Repeat with sincerity, Practice this not only during formal meditation, but also while walking, working, eating, or speaking. The more frequently you inquire, the more the ego loses its power. Ramana said that this consistent practice of self-inquiry is the most direct and effective way to weaken and eventually dissolve the ego. Ramana Maharshi gave us a very liberating understanding. The ego is not some powerful enemy that we have to fight for years. It is simply a wrong thought. The thought, I am the body. When this thought is investigated through self-inquiry, it loses its reality. What remains is our true nature, pure awareness, which is ever peaceful, ever free, and ever blissful. You are not the ego that appears and disappears. You are not the body that is born and will die. You are not the mind that thinks thousands of thoughts every day. You are the pure awareness in which the ego, the body, and the mind appear and disappear. This is the greatest discovery a human being can make. Continue to inquire with sincerity and patience. Do not be discouraged if the ego rises again and again. Every time you inquire, you are weakening its hold. Eventually, the ego will lose its power completely, and only the self will remain. Remain as the self. Be still. End of episode 2.